Joined now by Spencer Holbrook of Lettermen Row here at Michigan Stadium. Spencer, Ohio State has now lost 3 in a row to the Wolverines. Ryan Day said after the game, you work your whole year for this. Everyone's devastated. But where do they go from here?
Yeah, it's interesting because last year you thought that they still had a chance at the college football playoff, and they ultimately did because of the Caleb Williams injury and USC. And this year that path just doesn't really look viable. So last year they could hold on to that and say, let's see how the cards play out. But it's just a little different this year. There's not a blowout. There's not a defensive big plays that you can kind of say, okay, if those don't happen, if we can eliminate those, no big plays this year. So you eliminate the things that gashed you the first 2 years. You eliminate a couple of the things on defense that you thought you had solved. And I really don't know. This is as peculiar as a time that I've been on the beat because it's just, where do they go? It's a great question.
Well, and I don't think they played particularly poorly against Michigan. I thought they played well and got beat by a team that's probably a little bit better.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is J.J. McCarthy didn't turn the ball over and Kyle McCord did.
That's exactly right, yeah.
Kyle McCord played a really nice game. He really did. I think if you go back and watch throw by throw, you're going to be really impressed with what Six did out on the field.
But trying to force it in to Marv and Will Johnson's right there, that's the first touchdown right there.
You give Michigan a 7-yard field to get up 7-0. Then you go down and kick a field goal. You go down 14-3. He claws his way all the way back, and that was a Kyle McCord clawing back. He made some really good throws, and then he gets hit on the last one. He throws an interception, 2 turnovers to no turnovers. That's your ball game. I mean, you give Michigan a 7-yard field, and then you don't capitalize in the final minute when you thought you had something. That's the difference.
Yeah, and that was that last interception. The pressure. Yeah, probably causes that. That's not necessarily a bad throw, like he's getting dragged down. But it was a situation where Ohio State's defense put them in that situation by not getting off the field sooner.
Which is just so weird because this defense has hung its hat on third down efficiency and getting off the field. You look at the stop rate. They're 1 and 2 in stop rate.
Yeah.
Michigan didn't really get a lot of stops either. Ohio State did.
If you had told me that Ohio State would have a drive where they ran the ball 9 consecutive times and scored a touchdown in the second half, I would have said, oh, how much did Ohio State win by?
Yes. And that is probably the most head-scratching thing because Ryan Day, nobody's going to ask Ryan Day if Ohio State's tough. I know the Roman Wilson quote's out there, and that's fine. Players are going to be players. But if you watch that game, you're not questioning whether Ohio State is tough. You're questioning, why couldn't you get off the field on 3rd and 9 repeatedly in the first half? And what happened on 4th and short?
Right.
Because Ohio State got tough short yardage.
Yep.
They did what they needed to do on the offensive side, in my opinion, other than 2 turnovers. It's just I said in our video on Lettermen Row on Saturday night, you win on the margins in this game. Mm-hmm. And 30-yard punts are not winning on the margins, and 2 turnovers are not winning on the margins, and that's the difference in the game.
Well, and the thing Ryan Day got crushed over was the end of the first half.
Yes.
He has 4th and short, and I think it's really when it's placed in contrast with Sharon Moore, who told the Michigan players before the game he was going to be the most aggressive play caller they had ever seen and goes for 3 4th and shorts in the first half. Mm-hmm. And so you have Ryan Day with a 4th and short with about a minute to go. And instead of going for it, they opt to run the clock down and try to kick a 52-yard field goal as time expires that they miss.
Yeah, it was a 4th down. So it's a push-pull, right? You
don't want to give it back.
If you're Ryan Day, you don't want to give it to him at the 40-yard line with 25 seconds to go, but you want to be aggressive. And again, like we said on our video on Saturday night, Ryan Day against Georgia last year went for that, and he took a shot at the end zone before he kicked that field goal. Mm-hmm. And if he didn't get the 4th down, he lived with himself.
Yeah.
And there's something about this game that just it gets the best of people.
Yeah.
It's just a different game. That's what Urban Meyer always talks about, how it is just a different game, and you have to be different in this game. And Sharon Moore and the Michigan staff, I'll give them a lot of credit, 2 straight years now, on a big-time play, they've ran a halfback pass. This is the second straight year that Michigan has thrown a pass with a running back, and Ohio State has shown no creativity in its play calling 2 straight years.
Well, and when Michigan ran that is pretty key because so you have the Zach Zinner injury. They have to move Carson Barnhart to guard. They bring in a new right tackle. They were worried about protection because remember, Blake Corum scores on a run right after that.
Yeah, the next play.
So that was the next drive. And I think they felt like they couldn't protect McCarthy, so they needed to do something that looked like the run plays they'd been running, which they did. It was a very condensed formation. So as soon as they pitch, that play pops wide open.
Yep.
And really, it was them more protecting themselves than anything else. And I think they thought that was going to be a score.
Yeah.
it ends up being a field goal.
Yeah. When as good as J.J. McCarthy was, that was the longest pass for Michigan all day.
Yeah.
Congratulations, Ohio State. You didn't give up your 40-yard plays that you've been harping on all year, and you still get beat. And that's where we go back to the top of this. Like, where does Ohio State go from here? You've eliminated all the things that you thought were the reason that you lost the last two.
Yep.
And Ohio State hasn't used it as an excuse at all. Fans have, but the program has not. The sign stealing, whatever you want to say, even that is now like put to bed. Like everything was even out.
There's really nothing they can say at this point.
And you're still just at the point where it's like, okay, what has to change?
Yeah.
What do you do? Because 3 straight is 3 straight. And
well, this is where Michigan was. Like I remember being in this stadium a few years ago and going to Jim Harbaugh's interview after they got beat in 2019. They got destroyed by Ohio State. And people at Jim, is it recruiting? Is it coaching? Is it? And he had no answers. And just like Ryan Day Saturday night, no answers.
I think it's belief, to be honest with you, because these Michigan players, they taste it in 2021. Like Aiden Hutchinson walked out on the field for the coin flip, and I said, this guy's 1-3 against Ohio State. They've celebrated him, though, because he was the senior class that turned it around.
Yeah, they broke the streak.
You have to be the senior class that turns it around. You got to be that group that gets it done. And Ohio State now, next year, for the first time since the 90s, will not have a class on the roster that has beaten Michigan. They might have a couple players from the COVID year holdover, but you are talking a full recruiting cycle without players that have beaten Michigan. And so something has to change. Michigan right now certainly has the belief that they're not going to win.
Urban Meyer said it during the week that Ryan Day has to beat Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part that, how does he deal with this? They're going to have to play one more game this year. And then obviously they're recruiting. And then next year is a very different Big Ten.
Yes. And they'll go to Oregon next year. They'll play Michigan again next year. They go to Penn State next year. Like, it is not an easy road to get back to 11-0 before you play Michigan in Columbus. So it's, right for Ryan Day, it's you have to block out the noise. You got to continue to block it out, and it's just going to get louder, which makes it even tougher. You've got to block it out. You've got to figure out how to win on margins because, again, the last 3 years, they just have not done that. And then you've got to instill a belief. Like, there are still people in this building who have beaten this program. This is not a Goliath. And it didn't look like a Goliath out there. It looked like another really good team.
Yeah. They have to say the same thing that Michigan said to its players 2 years ago.
And it is, and I've lived this rivalry for 27 years.
Yeah.
Tim May on our staff, he's done this for 40 years. It is a rivalry of runs. It always has been and it always will be. The 80s, 90s, look at Michigan's run. The 2000s and 2010s, look at Ohio State's run. Ohio State has to figure out a way not to make this a decade run that Michigan goes on, and that starts in Columbus next year in November. And again, I told you this earlier in the week, the clock is already ticking, literally already ticking. As
soon as this game kicked off, the clock flipped, right?
The clock flips back, and they go back to every single day you look at the clock until the game, and you prepare for it every day. It's not that Ohio State hasn't done anything different than what they did in the Urban Meyer era. I don't, and that's why it's so tough to figure out where they go from here, because they're probably going to an Orange Bowl that they have no interest in being in.
Right. They're going to playing a Louisville or maybe a Florida State, depending on how things shake out. They're not going to be real thrilled about that, I would imagine.
No, and it's going to look like a lot different roster when we get to Miami, I'm sure, or Dallas, wherever they send the Buckeyes, it's going to look like a different roster.
Do you think we've seen the last time we're going to see Marvin Harrison in an Ohio State uniform?
I would say probably. I hesitate to do that, though, because he is the kind of guy, like if you've gotten to know him a little bit, he's the kind of guy that really would want to play, but I'm sure he'll be advised not to. There's a lot of guys on this roster that would be the same way. That 2021 recruiting class, as special as it is, it's maybe the most talented that Ohio State's had, top to bottom, and they're 0-3 against Michigan. So a lot of those guys have decisions to make based on that, and some decisions at Ohio State and Michigan are made on that.
Well, and that's interesting because Blake Corum talked about that after the game, and because Zach Zinner got hurt. Zach Zinner was another person who came back along with Blake Corum because they felt like they had unfinished business. Now, for them, it was to go deeper in the playoff. But you're right. There probably will be some Ohio State players who are on the fringe or maybe on the fence about it that want to come back and be that class that breaks the streak.
And in 2013, Ohio State did that. They went to the Orange Bowl against Clemson. They got beat in the Orange Bowl. Yep. They come back. They bring a lot of guys back who probably could have went to the NFL, and they make a run. 2014, they win a national championship. Now, college football looks a lot different than it did then, but it can happen. Yeah. Ohio State has shown that it will happen. at some point. And so you've got to try to convince some of these guys to get back. But there are some guys that, as tough of a pill as it is to swallow, you've seen the last of them at Ohio State.
Well, and what's really interesting here is if this all had happened next year, these teams enter both 8-0 in the Big Ten, they would play again next week.
Yeah.
But the thing is, next year might not be like that because there will be an Oregon and a Washington, and Penn State might be better. We'll see what happens with USC. It's going to be a different look for everybody.
Yeah, and that's why this was so what it was. 2 versus 3, but it's not just 2 versus 3. It's not just 11-0 versus 11-0. It's the last edition of the rivalry that truly is what we all know the game to be. Is
that if you lose, you suffer for a year.
If you lose, you are done.
Yeah.
And Ohio State got the very rare golden ticket last year and almost capitalized on it, almost wins a national championship. You're not doing that this year. And so at 11-1, this season is a failure. And that sucks to hear for an Ohio State fans, because you beat Notre Dame on the road. You beat Penn State in a team that some of us picked to make the college football playoff. You went to Madison and got a tough win against a team that's struggling, but in a tough environment. You felt like this was a really good group.
Right.
And you come here and 11-1 all of a sudden just looks like an absolute disaster compared to 12-0. And again, it's on the margins. The difference between disaster and perfection is so fine in this rivalry. And Michigan learned it for so long, and now Ohio State's learning it pretty hard.
Spencer, appreciate it.
Thanks, Andy.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples On 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.